Shakespears' Sister are a British pop rock duo who are desperately in need of an apostrophe. They were formed in 1988 as a solo act with this name, which was Siobhan Fahey. Don't know how you pronounce Fahey, anyway, who was ex of Bananarama. She was joined quite soon by Marcella Detroit, who sometimes works under the name Marcy Levy, who had worked with Eric Clapton previously and had co-wrote Lay Down Sally, which is a great song. They produced 2 albums and got quite a lot of success. However, Siobhan struggled with some mental health issues, and they started to have quite strong disagreements, and Marcella was summarily sacked through a message read out by somebody else publicly in 1994. And so at that point, Shakespears' Sister once again became a solo project. Things were falling apart definitely at that point, and they fell apart further, so the 3rd album wasn't released. So they stopped, or Siobhan stopped working under that name in 1996. That 3rd album did get released in 2004, but it wasn't until 2009 that she resurrected the name, Shakespears' Sister, and a new album was released called Songs from the Red Room. She then shelved it again in 2010, but in 2019, after 25 years of not talking, they arranged to have both of them, Siobhan Fahey and Marcella Detroit, to get back together under the name Shakespears' Sister to do some concert appearances. Hi, my name's Dan. So most of this channel is dedicated to a series of reviews that I'm doing of albums from a list that I found online, which is an amalgamated list in the same sort of way that Metacritic does things, but stretches back further. And purports to be the 3,000 greatest albums of all time, according to all these lists from critics. And I spend most of my reviewing time doing those, but occasionally I distract myself with something else. And this is one of those. This is one of the albums that I'm doing a review of because I think that it should have been in this list, and it isn't. So this distraction and this list of these distractions is what I call criminally missing. Okay, so this was Shakespears' Sister's 2nd album, and it was a huge success for them. And the big single from it was a song called Stay, which got to, I believe, was #1 in the UK for 8 weeks in a row. And huge, it was really, really well known, and possibly so huge that people got sick of them somewhat. I didn't at the time. I was quite a big fan. I really enjoyed their music. So let's do some description. I would describe this as pop or pop rock, somewhere in that kind of thing. Somewhere on the edges of what I think of as being the adult album market of the 80s. So there was a generation of people like me who grew up in the 70s, and as people did in that kind of age, we listened to the radio, we listened to stuff that was singles, and our musical awareness was pretty much focused on singles. And then as we grew up, a whole generation of us grew up and started to embrace albums. Albums have, of course, been around for a long time. But at that point, some of the people that we've been listening to on the radio then transitioned into making more album-based music, and this kind of album-based adult demographic. So I'm thinking of people like Tina Turner and Sting, and Dire Straits was kind of emerging, and all these sorts of things. And I kind of feel like this was on the edges of that. It was a little bit later, and it was a little bit more pop. The other way that I think about this is that I hear a lot of Eurythmics in here. So I've been a huge fan of Eurythmics through the kind of late 70s, early 80s, particularly kind of picking up through the 80s. And I tended to get Eurythmics albums at kind of a few years before this. And as I listened to this for the review, it struck me how strongly it reminded me of the kind of production that the Eurythmics had been using just a couple of years earlier. And so I assumed that it was David Stewart who was the musician half. That's not to say that Annie Lennox isn't a musician, but the kind of the driving force of the instruments in Eurythmics and the primary producer for the Eurythmics. And it sounds so similar that I thought it was David Stewart. And also I've made that assumption because at this point in time, Siobhan Fahey was married to David Stewart, so it would come as no surprise if that connection was there. And then I looked it up and found that it was a couple of other guys who weren't David Stewart at all. But it does have a kind of relationship to it, or it has a kind of similarity in sound. There's the kind of central theme here is there's two contrasting voices. So Marcella's got a kind of high, delicate's not the right word, but almost operatic voice with a kind of vulnerability to it. Whereas Siobhan has got more of a rock and a dark, gritty voice. Dark is the right word, especially in some of these tracks. And this is it is no more evident anywhere than it is in the track Stay, which really contrasts the two voices. And in the video, if you've seen the video, they're playing these two different roles. And Marcella's playing this role of a woman whose man is in a coma or on a deathbed of some kind, and Siobhan's playing the angel of death, and it's all quite dark in some ways, but dark kind of crossed with emotion. So that is kind of a standout track in the album, but there's a lot of other good tracks in here as well. The general content is about kind of real world crossed with mild fantasy things. One critic described it as saying it plays on the idea of female biological madness, but that was a female critic, so maybe she can get away with that. I'm just going to quote her and leave it out there. They were both pregnant at the time of recording, so apparently that's where the name of the album comes from. It's because they were both undergoing certain hormonal waves going on in there. Generally, I'd say it's darker than bubble pop, which is kind of what I might describe Bananarama as. That I don't mean that as dismissive, because I really like Bananarama, but this does have more darkness to it. It's not particularly deep or poignant, but it is definitely quirky. It's not, darkness at the extent of metal or lots of other kinds of music, but for stuff that's actually produced in quite a poppy and accessible way, some of the themes here are fairly dark. So I would kind of sum it up as being good pop. Come back to it's been described as pop rock, so maybe elements of rock in there, but the production is very pop, really, but very much of the time. Very Eurythmics of the time, and there's a kind of still a feeling of continuity there, despite the lack of Dave Stewart. Is that the Eurythmics had kind of called it a day by this point, and they were almost taking over that kind of niche, as it were. So I really like it, and I'd love to hear what you think. So please talk to me through the comments box. That's it from me for now.
Looking for something